of the most common questions that I get regarding the property game is what is this transfer process? How long does it take? What steps are included? And if this is the first time you're buying a property, you might not be aware of what all the legal steps are and all the checks and boxes and balances that go through actually transferring the ownership from one owner to the next. So in this short clip, I'll be sharing with you the normal, sequence of events that goes through when you're doing a transfer, and I'll do it from my perspective as the seller. So I've recently sold, or in the process of selling, my first ever unit that I bought about 10 years ago. And I'll just share with you exactly what the attorneys have given me in terms of the structure that they follow. So before we get into the detail, the basic idea of the transferring process is it's going to take about 3 to 4 months normally to go from, the seller into the buyer's name. And the reason for that length is because there's a lot of documents that need to be signed by both the seller and the buyer, and a lot of checks and balances need to occur. Now with COVID, things have slowed down slightly, so you might be actually budgeting, instead of 3 to 4 months, you might want to budget 5, 6 months, depending on the backlog that your municipality is dealing with. Now, that's not so important when you're looking at the buy and hold strategy. It's much more applicable when you're doing the buy and sell, or the flipping strategy, as it's sometimes called, because you need to know when you can start with the renovations and when you can actually put the property back on the market to get resold. So the longer the transfer process, the longer you'll have to wait before you can actually start the renovations, get access to the property. So you want to try and find the best and most effective way to go through the transfer. So let's look through the steps that this process goes through. Now, a lot of attorneys that I've worked with use this Lexi Tracker automation tool, and what they'll do is they'll just send me a weekly update to say, okay, well, we've checked off this box today. So the first action, okay, so the first thing here is instruction received. So on the 2nd of June is when I got a signed OTP, or I countersigned an OTP from a buyer who wanted to buy the unit, and therefore the instruction was then sent to the attorneys to say, please start the process. So that's what instruction received means. It's when you've basically got a signed OTP between you and the seller or the buyer, whatever the instance is, and the attorneys are now involved. So that's the first step. Then title deed. Now what you'll notice here is that the timelines don't necessarily correlate with the actions, and that's pretty common. You're not always going to follow this 1, 2, 3, 4. You might do 1, then 6, then 3, then 4 in terms of the dates that they are completed, which makes it a bit confusing. But in terms of just going through this, I'm going to go a line item by line item, but don't be confused if the date doesn't correlate with the action number. So once the instruction's been received by the attorneys, me as the landlord or the current owner, the person who's selling the property, I have to provide the attorneys with the title deed. Now I'm not going to give them the title deed until I've been at least the deposit has been received by the purchaser and the bond has been granted, right? So that's where the order of these actions comes into play, and that's why you'll see the dates don't necessarily correlate. But yeah, so the second step would then be getting the title deed. So I've got a piece of paper that says I'm the legal rightful owner of this property. I have to then offer that over to the attorneys because they're obviously going to transfer that to the new owner. Rates figures requested. So this is where the attorneys will contact me and say, please, can we have your COJ or your utility bill? Because over the next 3 to 4 months while the transferring is happening, I need to be able to clear that amount. What does that mean? So let's say you've got rates and taxes of R1,000 per month. That's the bill that you get as the owner of this property. When you're going to sell, for those next 3 to 4 months while the transferring is happening, you have to prepay your utility bill so that by the time it gets into the new owner's hands, they have no debt, they have no additional costs, they start on a clean slate. So what that means is if you've got R1,000 bill per month, at the end of 4 months, that's 4,000. You'll have to prepay that 4,000 Rand to clear your rates and taxes bill for the next 4 months so that when the ownership registers into the new person's name, they start on a clean slate. Okay, so that's what that is. Levies, same thing. So you want to make sure that your body corporate or your levy account is up to date. You'll pay it 3-4 months in advance to make sure that when it lands into the owner's name, they have a clean slate. Then the deposit must be received from the purchaser. So if you're getting let's say you're getting a 90% loan to value from the bank, then 10% needs to be put down by the buyer, and that needs to be done. That's part of the terms and conditions of the OTP. The bond due date, so you can see here that I gave them 2 weeks essentially from when the instruction was received up until the point where the bond was due was 2 weeks. Now the bond granted to the purchaser, this is when the bank comes back and says where we're going to loan in the money, was about a week later. So I did have 2 weeks later, I gave a bit of leniency. But yes, the bond due date, when the grant must be given and when the grant was actually given. Number 8, now the transfer documentation. Here you go. You've got to sign it as the purchaser, and this is not something you can sign electronically. This is something you have to go into the attorney's office. They're going to have a commissioner of oath, and you're going to sign under oath. Now, the reason why my specific property is taking so long, I mean, it's probably a 5-month transfer period, is because the new buyer is overseas. He's in Saudi somewhere. So I signed it. As you can see, I signed it on the 15th of July. It then needed to be couriered to Saudi, where the seller, the buyer could sign under oath. So that's what those two sections are. The purchaser and the seller must both sign in front of a commissioner of oath the transfer documents. The pro forma costs, so that's really the costs that the transferring attorneys are going to have, things like their FICA, their petties, their costs for doing the work. That's something that you'll have to pay. They'll send you a statement, and that's just something that you'll need to pay. So that's what that section is. Your transfer duty, so that's the SARS or the tax bill that you'll need to pay as part of the transfer. Now, mostly the buyer is the one who will have to pay the transfer duties, right? As the seller, in this context, I'm the seller, I pay the estate agent's commission. The buyer pays the transfer duty, or I sometimes call it the buying costs. So your bond registration and your transfer duties are payable by the buyer. Guarantees due. So this is when basically the bank needs to pay, so to speak, or your deposit needs to be down, or at least your bond approval needs to be in place. Then the guarantees received, so that's when it's paid into the attorney's trust account. The rates clearance certificate received. So remember, step 3, you have to prepay your utility bill for X number of months, and the attorney will work out that calculation for you, and they'll send you, the cost you have to pay. Then at step 14, they're going to request from the city of Johannesburg and say, please, can we have an updated statement on this person's account? And it needs to show 0, or it needs to be paid up, and then that's essentially the clearance. And that's what they mean by rates clearance certificate, is that they've got proof that it is cleared, that there's no more debt. Because as the buyer must come into the property not with any debt from a rates and taxes perspective or levies, unless it's stated in the OTP. But most of the time, you as the buyer taking over should have a clean slate. Your electrical certificate is very important. You as the seller have to pay for this. So that's basically getting an electrician / handyman to come and view the property, to run some tests. He'll check the lights, the switches. He'll make sure that everything is in order, and then he'll give you a certificate to say, it's all good. In my case, I think I had to pay about 2,000 Rand so that he could fiddle a little bit with some of the electricals, and then he gave me the certificate. Transfer duty, so that's the payment to SARS. Then, these last few steps, this is when you're getting really, really close to it actually transferring into your name. Once it's lodged, which I'm hoping in the case of my property will be happening next week, then the transfer is imminent. Then it's basically another 2 weeks of waiting. So that's the lodged. That's when they lodge it at the deeds office to say, please, can you change the ownership from A to B? They've got some prepping to do from a legal documents perspective. And then finally, step 19 is when it's registered. That means you're officially an owner or a seller of the property. So I know that was probably quite a mouthful and maybe a little bit intimidating and overwhelming. But remember that your attorney is going to be walking you through this step by step. So they'll provide you with all the things that you need to do. So when you need to pay your rates, They'll give you a bill and a statement to say this is what we project it's going to be. Please pay this. You then pay it, send a proof of payment, sorted. When you have to pay their legal fees, their FICA documents, and all of that stuff, they'll ask you, they'll request you, they'll take you through it step by step. And what's nice is, hopefully they use this tool like my attorney uses Lexi Tracker, where on a weekly basis you see an update and you can see, okay, what's the next step. If I go back to this email, and this is quite an outdated email, but here you can see the comment, right? So on the 21st of July, that was a couple months ago, guarantees were requested, signature of purchaser. You see, purchaser is in Saudi Arabia. We will need to courier both the transfer documents and bond documents for him to sign at the embassy. And then here, rates figure paid. Cool. So you can see that there were three things that were done in the last week. The guarantees were requested, the transfer and bond docs have been sent to the buyer in Saudi, and me as the seller, I've paid the rates figure. So as long as you're staying on top of things and you're nagging your attorney every now and again when you need stuff done, the transfer process is actually quite seamless. Usually 3 to 4 months, but with COVID slightly longer. I hope this was useful. Until next time. Happy investing.
Are you tired of having more month at the end of your money? It's time to venture into property investing. And although it may seem scary, don't worry. We've created tons of resources to help you get started. From tools that help you analyze deals to online training courses to one-on-one specialized coaching. Click the link in the comments below and get started today.